Hello and welcome back to the Sleepy Darwin. Whether you're here to drift into peaceful sleep, to let the day's tensions melt away, or simply to explore the quiet mysteries that unfold within your own body, you've found the perfect sanctuary. Tonight, we're embarking on a gentle journey through the most loyal guardians you never see, the cellular army that has protected you since your very first breath, yet sometimes loses its way in the darkness of your inner universe. This is the story of immunity turned inward, of molecular conversations that go beautifully, tragically wrong, and of the delicate balance between protection and self-destruction that plays out in the hidden theaters of tissue and blood. Before we begin this soothing exploration, if these sleepy scientific wanderings bring you comfort, a gentle tap of the like button and subscribe would mean the world to me. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what hour finds you seeking rest? Are you in a bustling city finally quieting down, or somewhere peaceful where the night already reigns? Now, I do hope this isn't so fascinating that it keeps you alert, but if it does, at least you'll drift off understanding the remarkable complexity of your cellular protectors. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and join me as we whisper through the microscopic civil wars that sometimes unfold within us all. Where are you right now, as you listen to these words? Perhaps you're nestled in your favorite chair, or maybe you've found that perfect spot in bed where the pillows cradle you just right. Wherever you are, I want you to take a moment and imagine something extraordinary. Right now, this very second, within the warm confines of your body, there exists a vast, invisible city, not built of concrete and steel, but of living cells so small that millions could dance on the head of a pin. This is your immune system, and it is perhaps the most sophisticated civilization ever to exist. Picture, if you will, a metropolis that never sleeps. Its citizens are immune cells, tiny sentinels, each no bigger than a speck of cosmic dust, yet each one a marvel of biological engineering. They patrol your bloodstream like night watchmen walking lamplit streets, drift through your lymph nodes like commuters moving through grand central stations, and stand guard at every gateway where the outside world might try to enter your inner sanctuary. These cellular citizens have names that sound almost mythical: neutrophils and lymphocytes, macrophages and dendritic cells, natural killer cells and memory B cells. Each type has evolved over millions of years to perform specific roles in this microscopic society, and together they create what we might call the most beautiful choreography of protection ever conceived by nature. Let's begin with the neutrophils. Imagine them as the first responders of your immune city. When danger signals echo through your tissues, these cells arrive within minutes, ready to sacrifice themselves in waves to protect you. They're like molecular firefighters, rushing toward inflammation with an urgency that would put any emergency service to shame. A single drop of your blood contains thousands of these guardian cells, each one living only a few days but spending every hour of that brief existence in devoted service to your well-being. Then there are the macrophages, and oh, what poetry lies in their very name, which means big eaters. These are the gentle giants of your immune system, cells large enough to engulf bacteria whole, to clean up the debris of cellular battles, and to send chemical messages that coordinate the entire immune response. Picture them as wise custodians, moving slowly through your tissues, keeping everything tidy, removing anything that doesn't belong. They're patient and thorough, taking time to examine everything they encounter with the careful attention of master craftsmen. But perhaps the most fascinating citizens of your immune city are the lymphocytes, the T cells and B cells that serve as your body's molecular librarians. These remarkable cells maintain the most comprehensive filing system in the known universe, a living library of every threat your body has ever encountered. Your B cells are like master scribes, each one capable of producing millions of identical antibodies, molecular keys designed to fit the locks of specific invaders. When a B cell encounters a threat, it recognizes, it transforms into something called a plasma cell, becoming a tiny factory that churns out antibodies at a rate that would make any industrial manufacturer weep with envy. Imagine, a single activated B cell can produce 2,000 antibodies per second, 2,000 exquisitely crafted molecular tools, each one seeking its perfect target with the determination of a heat-seeking missile. And the T cells? They're the coordinators and the specialists. Helper T cells are like cellular conductors, orchestrating the immune response with chemical signals that tell other cells when to attack, when to retreat, and when to remember. Cytotoxic T cells are the precision assassins, capable of identifying infected cells and eliminating them with surgical accuracy, often triggering the infected cell to destroy itself in a process so elegant that scientists gave it a name befitting its beauty, apoptosis, from the Greek word for falling leaves. Right now, as you listen to my voice, millions of these guardians are patrolling your bloodstream. Every 24 hours, about 5 billion new immune cells are born in your bone marrow, a cellular nursery hidden within the hard calcium scaffolding of your skeleton. These newborn defenders emerge into your circulatory system like graduates entering the world, each one carrying the genetic wisdom of millions of years of evolution. But here's where the story becomes truly wondrous. Your immune system doesn't just protect you from foreign invaders, it also serves as the keeper of your biological identity. Every cell in your body carries molecular identification tags, proteins called MHC molecules that are as unique to you as your fingerprints. These tags are like cellular passports, identifying each cell as belonging to you and no one else. This is how your immune system knows self from non-self, how it can distinguish between your own healthy tissues and everything else in the world. It's a concept so fundamental that we might call it the biological definition of identity itself. You are not just your thoughts, your memories, or your experiences. You are also this unique molecular signature, written in the language of proteins and carried by every cell in your body. Think about this for a moment. Your immune system can tell the difference between you and an identical twin. It can distinguish between your cells and those of your mother, even though half of your genetic material came from her. It can even detect when one of your own cells has been infected by a virus and is no longer quite you, marking it for destruction with the precision of a molecular detective. This recognition system is so sophisticated that it can identify threats it has never encountered before, simply by recognizing patterns that don't belong in your biological neighborhood. It's like having a security system that can spot an intruder not because it has their photograph, but because it knows so intimately what belongs in your home that anything foreign immediately stands out. And the memory of your immune system is something that would make elephants jealous. Some of your immune cells can remember encounters from decades ago. That childhood chickenpox, that bout of measles your grandmother had, the vaccinations you received as a baby, all of these experiences are carefully catalogued in the living libraries of your immune cells, ready to mount a rapid response if those specific threats ever dare to show their molecular faces again. This is why you typically get chickenpox only once, why vaccines work, why your body can respond so quickly to familiar threats. Your immune system is not just protecting you in the present moment, it's drawing upon a lifetime of accumulated wisdom, a cellular memory that spans your entire existence. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this microscopic city is how it maintains itself. Your immune cells don't live forever. Most of them have lifespans measured in days or weeks. Yet the system endures, constantly renewing itself, constantly learning, constantly adapting. It's like a city that rebuilds itself every few months, yet never loses its essential character or its accumulated knowledge. As you breathe right now in and out, your immune cells are riding the currents of your circulation, moving through vessels so small that they must travel in single file, yet covering every inch of your body with their vigilant presence. They're checking your tissues for signs of infection, clearing away damaged cells, monitoring for anything that might threaten the delicate balance of your inner ecosystem. Some of these cells will complete their patrol and return to rest in your lymph nodes, those small, bean-shaped way stations scattered throughout your body that serve as meeting places and communication hubs for immune cells. Others will take up residence in specific tissues, like local police officers assigned to particular neighborhoods, ready to respond immediately to any signs of trouble in their designated territories. And through it all, through every heartbeat and every breath, this vast network of cellular guardians works together with a coordination that would make the finest orchestra seem chaotic by comparison. They communicate through chemical signals, share information across vast cellular distances, and coordinate their responses with a precision that emerges not from any central command, but from the elegant algorithms of evolution itself. Imagine, right now, millions of these guardians are patrolling your bloodstream. As you settle more deeply into your comfortable spot, as your breathing slows and your heart rate gentles, they continue their eternal vigil, They ask nothing of you in return, no conscious effort, no deliberate direction. They simply serve, with a dedication that spans every moment of your life, from your first breath to your last. This is the miracle of your immune system in its natural state, a perfect balance of vigilance and tolerance, of protection and restraint. It's a system so elegantly designed that it can mount a fierce defense against genuine threats, while simultaneously maintaining peace with the trillions of cells that make up your body. But as we'll discover together, this very sophistication, this exquisite ability to distinguish friend from foe, also contains within it the seeds of a different kind of story. A story about what happens when these molecular guardians, trained to perfection in the art of recognition, sometimes begin to see enemies where none exist. In the beginning, every immune cell starts as a blank slate, a cellular student with enormous potential, but no knowledge of the world it will be asked to protect. These naive cells are born in your bone marrow with something like infinite possibility written into their genetic code. They carry within them the ability to recognize virtually any threat that might exist in the universe. Viruses from distant jungles, bacteria from the deepest ocean trenches, even threats that have never existed but might someday evolve. It's a remarkable thought, isn't it? Each immune cell begins life with the theoretical capacity to defend against dangers that haven't even been discovered yet. But this vast potential comes with an equally vast problem. If these cells could react to absolutely everything, they would inevitably react to you. And so begins one of biology's most delicate educational processes, a molecular school where young immune cells learn the most important lesson they will ever master: the difference between what belongs and what doesn't, between self and non-self, between friend and foe. Let me take you on a journey to a small organ nestled behind your breastbone, just above your heart. It's called the thymus, a name that comes from the Greek word for the herb we know as thyme, because early anatomists thought it resembled a bundle of the aromatic leaves. But this small, soft organ is far more precious than any herb. It is, quite literally, a molecular school for young immune cells, and what happens within its chambers will determine whether your immune system becomes your greatest protector or your most dangerous enemy. Picture the thymus as an academy unlike any other, a place where T cells, those crucial coordinators of immune response, come to learn the most fundamental lesson of their existence. Every day, millions of immature T cells migrate from your bone marrow to this lymphoid finishing school, carrying with them receptors that are essentially random combinations of molecular building blocks. This randomness is itself a marvel of biological engineering. Through a process of genetic shuffling that would make a Las Vegas dealer envious, each T cell generates a unique receptor, a molecular antenna designed to detect one specific shape among all the possible shapes in the universe. The mathematics of this diversity are staggering. Your immune system can theoretically generate more different receptor types than there are stars in the observable universe. But here's where the story becomes both beautiful and perilous. Among those millions of randomly generated receptors, some will inevitably be shaped to recognize your own tissues. These are the cellular students who, left to their own devices, would graduate to become autoimmune warriors, immune cells that attack the very body they're meant to protect. And so, within the hallowed halls of the thymus, begins a process that scientists call negative selection, though I prefer to think of it as the gentlest form of quality control ever devised by nature. Here, young T cells encounter a parade of molecular shapes that represent every normal component of your body. Think of it as a comprehensive introduction to self, a cellular curriculum that includes samples of every protein, every tissue type, every molecular signature that defines you as you. The thymus is staffed by specialized cells that act as molecular teachers, presenting these self-antigens to the young T-cell students. It's like a vast exhibition hall, where each immune cell walks through gallery after gallery of things that belong in this body, learning to recognize and tolerate the molecular landscape of home. Most T cells pass this test beautifully. They examine the parade of self-antigens with their unique receptors and find nothing that triggers their activation circuits. These cells are like students who look at the curriculum and think, "None of this is my concern. I'll wait for something foreign to come along." They graduate from the thymus as mature, tolerant T cells, ready to patrol your body without ever mistaking your own tissues for threats. But some T cells, those unfortunate students whose randomly generated receptors happen to recognize something on the self-antigen parade, face a different fate. These cells light up with activation when they encounter pieces of your own body, sending signals that say, "This is dangerous, this must be destroyed." In a healthy thymus, these self-reactive cells are gently eliminated through apoptosis, that same elegant cellular suicide we discussed earlier. It's not a violent process. Rather, it's like a peaceful dissolution, the cell simply fading away as if it had never been. Scientists estimate that about 95% of all T cells that enter the thymus are eliminated in this way, sacrificing themselves to maintain the peace between your immune system and your body. This process of immune education continues throughout your life, though it's most intense during childhood when your thymus is largest and most active. As you age, your thymus gradually shrinks, like a school that has taught most of what it needs to teach. But even in adulthood, this organ continues its quiet work, ensuring that new immune cells learn the essential lesson of tolerance. There's something profoundly moving about this process when you really think about it. Your body literally teaches your immune cells not to harm you. It's like a parent patiently explaining to a child which people in the neighborhood are friends, which are family, and which are strangers who might mean harm. The thymus serves as this patient teacher, showing each immune cell the molecular faces of home and saying, "These belong to us. These are not your concern." But the education doesn't end in the thymus. There's another layer of immune learning that happens throughout your body, in your lymph nodes and other peripheral tissues. This is where immune cells encounter foreign antigens for the first time, bits of bacteria, viruses, allergens, and other substances that clearly don't belong. Here, a different kind of teaching takes place. Instead of learning tolerance, immune cells learn recognition and response. They're introduced to molecular shapes that are decidedly non-self, and they learn to mount appropriate responses to each type of threat. It's like advanced training where the cellular students learn not just what to ignore, but what to attack and how. This peripheral education is where your immune cells develop what we call immunological memory, that remarkable ability to remember past encounters and respond more quickly to familiar threats. When a mature immune cell first encounters a foreign antigen, it's like meeting a stranger for the first time. The response is cautious, methodical, and takes several days to reach full strength. But if that same cell, or its offspring, encounters the same antigen again, the response is swift and decisive. It's like recognizing an old enemy in a crowd, immediate identification followed by a rapid, targeted response. This is the principle behind vaccination. We introduce your immune system to weakened or harmless versions of dangerous pathogens, allowing your cells to learn their molecular signatures in a safe environment. The beauty of this educational system lies in its exquisite balance. Your immune cells must be aggressive enough to destroy genuine threats, yet restrained enough to leave your own tissues unharmed. They must be sensitive enough to detect single infected cells among billions of healthy ones, yet stable enough not to overreact to harmless substances like food proteins or pollen. This balance is maintained through an intricate network of checks and balances, a system of cellular signals that can either activate or suppress immune responses as needed. There are T cells whose job is to turn on immune responses when threats are detected, and others whose role is to turn off those same responses when the danger has passed. There are cells that amplify signals and cells that dampen them, cells that remember threats, and cells that promote forgetting. It's like a vast orchestra, where every instrument must play its part at precisely the right moment, where the volume must be adjusted constantly to match the needs of the piece, where silence is as important as sound. When this orchestration works perfectly, you remain healthy, protected from threats yet free from the chaos of autoimmune attack. But sometimes, and this is where our story takes a more complex turn, this delicate educational process goes awry. Sometimes the molecular teachers in the thymus fail to present a complete curriculum of self-antigens, allowing self-reactive T cells to graduate without proper education. Sometimes the peripheral tolerance mechanisms break down, failing to keep potentially dangerous immune cells in check. Sometimes, genetic variations affect how well immune cells can distinguish between self and non-self. Sometimes environmental triggers, infections, stress, chemical exposures disrupt the careful balance between immunity and tolerance. Sometimes the very sophistication of the immune system, its exquisite sensitivity to molecular details, becomes a liability rather than an asset. And sometimes, for reasons we don't fully understand, immune cells that have lived peacefully in your body for years suddenly begin to see familiar tissues through different eyes. They look at cells they've ignored for decades and suddenly perceive them as foreign invaders deserving of destruction. This is the paradox we'll explore together in our continuing journey. How the very system that defines your biological identity can sometimes lose sight of who you are. How cells trained to perfection in the art of recognition can sometimes begin to misrecognize the tissues they've sworn to protect. But what happens when these guardians lose their way? When the molecular librarians begin to catalog your own tissues as threats? When the careful balance between protection and tolerance tips towards something more troubling? That, dear listener, is where our story becomes both more complex and more deeply human. Because when your immune system turns against you, it's not just a biological malfunction, it's a profound disruption of the very cellular conversation that defines who you are. It's what happens when the guardians of your biological identity begin to question the identity they've spent your entire life protecting. And that is where we'll turn our attention next, as we explore what scientists call autoimmunity, the beautiful, terrible phenomenon that occurs when your body's most sophisticated protection system becomes its own worst enemy. As you rest there, perhaps feeling the steady rhythm of your own heartbeat, I want you to consider something both beautiful and deeply troubling. Everything we've just explored together, that magnificent city of immune cells, those patient molecular teachers, that exquisite balance between protection and tolerance, all of it represents one of evolution's greatest achievements. And yet, within this very perfection lies the seed of something that seems almost impossible to believe. Sometimes, this system that has spent millions of years learning to protect you turns against you instead. Autoimmunity is, at its heart, a case of mistaken identity in the cellular world. It's what happens when your immune cells, those same guardians we've come to know so intimately, begin to perceive your own tissues as foreign invaders. The very sophistication that makes your immune system so effective at recognizing threats becomes the mechanism of its betrayal. There's something almost Shakespearean about this biological tragedy. The immune cells don't become evil or malicious, they remain just as dedicated, just as precise, just as beautifully coordinated as ever. They continue to follow their programming with the same devotion they've always shown. The tragedy lies in the fact that their programming has somehow been rewritten, their perception altered, their fundamental understanding of self corrupted. Imagine, if you will, a loyal guard who has protected a castle for years, knowing every face that belongs within its walls. One day, through some mysterious change in perception, this same guard begins to see the castle's own inhabitants as intruders. The guard's dedication hasn't wavered, their vigilance hasn't diminished, their skills haven't deteriorated. But now all of that loyalty, vigilance, and skill is turned against the very people they once protected. This is the autoimmune paradox. Your body's most sophisticated protection system, functioning exactly as it was designed to function, but with its targeting system somehow recalibrated to attack home. Scientists have identified more than 80 different autoimmune conditions, each one representing a different way that this mistaken identity can manifest. But rather than overwhelm you with medical terminology and statistics, let me share with you some gentle stories, molecular tales of how these cellular civil wars unfold, each one fought in the beautiful, terrible language of chemistry and biology. Let's begin with a story about sweetness and survival, about tiny islands of cells hidden within your pancreas that most people never think about until something goes wrong. These are the beta cells, clustered in structures called the islets of Langerhans, named after the young German medical student who first described them in 1869. Paul Langerhans was only 22 when he made this discovery. Peering through his microscope at pancreatic tissue and noticing these peculiar islands of cells scattered like archipelagos through the organ. These beta cells have one of the most crucial jobs in your entire body. They sense the sugar levels in your blood and respond by releasing insulin, that master hormone that allows your cells to absorb glucose and convert it into energy. It's a process so fundamental to life that these cells work around the clock, constantly monitoring, constantly adjusting, constantly maintaining the delicate balance that keeps you alive. In type 1 diabetes, your immune system develops what can only be described as a vendetta against these innocent beta cells. T cells that should ignore pancreatic tissue begin to see these sugar makers as dangerous intruders. They infiltrate the islets like microscopic armies, releasing chemical weapons that systematically destroy the beta cells one by one. The process is often slow and relentless. For months or even years, your pancreas continues to function as more and more beta cells are eliminated. Your remaining cells work harder to compensate, like survivors taking on extra shifts to keep a factory running. But eventually, when about 80% of the beta cells have been destroyed, the system collapses. Your blood sugar begins to rise, and your body enters a state of metabolic chaos. What makes this particularly haunting is the precision of the attack. Your immune system doesn't randomly destroy pancreatic tissue, it specifically targets only the insulin-producing beta cells, leaving the neighboring cells that produce other hormones largely untouched. It's like a burglar who enters a house and steals only one specific item, leaving everything else perfectly intact. Now let me tell you about your joints, those marvels of biological engineering that allow you to move through the world with such fluid grace. Each joint is a masterpiece of design, with bones shaped to fit together perfectly, cartilage providing smooth surfaces for friction-free movement, and synovial fluid, lubricating the whole system like the finest oil. The synovium, the thin membrane that lines your joints, is normally one of the most peaceful places in your body. It quietly produces that lubricating fluid, maintains the joint's health, and goes about its business with hardly any immune activity at all. In a healthy joint, immune cells are rare visitors, arriving only when injury or infection requires their intervention. But in rheumatoid arthritis, this peaceful tissue becomes a battlefield. Immune cells begin to infiltrate the synovium, setting up what can only be described as permanent military installations within your joints. They don't just visit and leave, they move in, establish supply lines, and begin a campaign of systematic destruction. The infiltrating cells include T cells, B cells, macrophages, and others, all working together with the same precision they would use to fight a genuine infection. They release inflammatory chemicals that cause the synovium to thicken and become aggressive. This inflamed tissue then begins to invade the cartilage and bone, like ivy slowly overtaking a stone wall. The symmetry of this condition is one of its most mysterious features. Rheumatoid arthritis typically affects both sides of the body equally. If it strikes the joints in your right hand, it will likely attack the same joints in your left hand as well. It's as if your immune system has developed a systematic plan of attack, following some internal blueprint that targets specific joints in a predictable pattern. What's particularly tragic is that this destruction often occurs in the small joints of the hands and feet, the very joints that give us our most delicate and precise movements. These are the joints that allow pianists to play, artists to paint, writers to hold a pen. The immune system, in its misguided precision, often targets the very architecture that makes us most human. Perhaps the most poetic of all autoimmune stories involves your nervous system, that incredible network of electrical wiring that carries messages between your brain and every part of your body. Your nerve fibers are like biological cables, each one wrapped in a substance called myelin that serves as insulation, ensuring that electrical signals travel quickly and efficiently to their destinations. Myelin is produced by specialized cells called oligodendrocytes in your brain and spinal cord, and by Schwann cells in your peripheral nerves. These cells wrap around nerve fibers like a craftsperson, carefully wrapping electrical wire, creating layer upon layer of protective insulation. The result is a sheath that's not only protective, but also beautiful under a microscope. Myelinated nerves look like strings of pearls, each segment perfectly formed and precisely spaced. In multiple sclerosis, your immune system begins to attack this myelin insulation with devastating consequences. T cells cross the blood-brain barrier, normally one of the most secure boundaries in your body, and begin to strip away the myelin sheaths like someone methodically removing insulation from electrical wires. The process is often described in military terms: demyelination, lesions, attacks. But I prefer to think of it as a tragic case of molecular confusion. Your immune cells, designed to protect your most precious organ, begin to perceive the very insulation that keeps your nervous system functioning as a foreign threat that must be eliminated. The symptoms of multiple sclerosis reflect this electrical chaos. When the insulation is damaged, nerve signals become unreliable. Messages from your brain to your muscles might arrive delayed, distorted, or not at all. Vision can become blurred when the optic nerves are affected, Coordination falters when the cerebellum's connections are disrupted. Memory and thinking can be affected when lesions form in cognitive areas of the brain. What makes this condition particularly mysterious is its unpredictability. Multiple sclerosis often follows a pattern of attacks and remissions, periods when symptoms worsen followed by times when they improve or even disappear completely. It's as if your immune system periodically calls a ceasefire in this cellular war, allowing damaged tissue to heal, only to resume the attack weeks, months, or years later. These stories of sugar makers under siege, joints transformed into battlefields, electrical systems sabotaged by their own protectors represent just a small sampling of the ways autoimmunity can manifest. Each condition tells a similar tale. Immune cells, functioning with perfect biological precision, but somehow convinced that parts of your own body are dangerous enemies that must be destroyed. There's a haunting beauty in how precisely these systems can go wrong. The immune attacks aren't random or chaotic, they're methodical, targeted, and often follow predictable patterns. Your immune system brings all of its sophisticated recognition capabilities, all of its coordinated responses, all of its evolutionary wisdom to bear on these attacks. The tragedy isn't that the system is broken, it's that the system is working exactly as designed, but with the wrong target list. It's like watching a master archer demonstrate perfect form, flawless technique, and unerring accuracy, while aiming at the wrong targets. The skill is undeniable, the precision is remarkable, and the results are devastating. But this raises the question that might be forming in your mind as you listen. How does this happen? How does a system so perfectly designed to protect you become convinced that you are the enemy? What transforms loyal guardians into rebels, protectors into destroyers? To understand this, we need to become molecular detectives ourselves, following clues that scientists have been gathering for more than a century, piecing together the mystery of how and why our immune systems sometimes lose their way. The story of how scientists discovered autoimmunity reads like the finest detective novel ever written, except that the crime scene was invisible, the evidence was molecular, and the perpetrators were some of the smallest entities in the human body. It began with observations that seemed to make no sense, clues that pointed toward an impossible conclusion, and investigators who had to invent entirely new ways of seeing before they could solve the mystery. Picture, if you will, the medical world of the early 1900s. Doctors knew that the immune system fought infections, but the idea that it might attack the body itself seemed as absurd as suggesting that police officers might systematically destroy the very neighborhoods they'd sworn to protect. The immune system was understood as purely beneficial, a biological army that existed solely to defend against foreign invaders. But then came the observations that didn't fit this simple narrative. Patients with strange symptoms that seemed to have no infectious cause. Conditions that ran in families but weren't clearly inherited in simple patterns. Diseases that waxed and waned mysteriously, that responded to treatments in unpredictable ways, that seemed to involve the body attacking itself. It was like finding fingerprints at a crime scene that belonged to the homeowner. One of the first breakthrough discoveries came from a German scientist named Paul Ehrlich in 1900. Ehrlich was studying what happened when he injected animals with their own blood cells, expecting to see no immune response at all. After all, why would the immune system react to the animal's own tissues? But instead, he observed something that challenged everything scientists thought they knew. The animals did mount an immune response, producing antibodies against their own blood cells. Ehrlich called this phenomenon horror autotoxicus, literally horror of self-poisoning. He was so disturbed by this finding that he initially dismissed it as an experimental artifact, something that could never happen in nature. The name he chose reveals just how unsettling this discovery was. The idea that the body might poison itself, might turn its own weapons against its own tissues, was so contrary to everything scientists believed about biology that it seemed almost supernatural, a horror story written in the language of cells and antibodies. But the evidence kept accumulating. In the 1942nd and 52nd, researchers began to find antibodies in patients' blood that reacted against their own tissues. It was like discovering that security guards were carrying detailed maps of how to break into the buildings they were supposed to protect. The real breakthrough came with the development of new laboratory techniques that allowed scientists to see these autoimmune reactions directly. Immunofluorescence microscopy, developed in the 1952nd, could make antibodies glow with ethereal light when they bound to their targets. Suddenly, researchers could watch in real time as a patient's own antibodies attacked their tissues, lighting them up like a microscopic aurora. As the evidence mounted, scientists began to realize they were dealing with something far more complex than simple malfunction. These weren't random cellular accidents, they were precisely orchestrated attacks that followed specific patterns and targeted particular tissues with remarkable consistency. This led to one of the most important questions in autoimmune research. Why do these conditions develop? What transforms a perfectly functioning immune system into one that attacks its own body? The answer, as scientists gradually discovered, involves a complex interplay between three main factors: genetics, environment, and what researchers call molecular mimicry. Think of it as a perfect storm that requires multiple elements to come together in just the right way, or perhaps the wrong way, to trigger autoimmune disease. Let's begin with genetics. Those instructions written in the elegant double helix of DNA that sits coiled within every cell nucleus like a microscopic library containing the complete blueprint for your body. Scientists discovered that autoimmune diseases tend to cluster in families, passed down through generations like heirloom recipes, though not in the simple patterns of classic genetic disorders. Instead, what gets inherited is susceptibility, an increased likelihood that autoimmunity might develop, rather than a guarantee that it will. The most important genetic players in this story are the HLA genes, human leukocyte antigens. Remember those molecular identification tags we discussed earlier, the proteins that mark your cells as uniquely yours? The HLA genes are the instruction manuals for making those tags, and certain versions of these genes create identification systems that seem more prone to confusion. It's like having a security system that's almost too sensitive, almost too good at detecting tiny differences. People with certain HLA gene variants have immune systems that are particularly vigilant, particularly precise in their recognition capabilities. Under normal circumstances, this might be an advantage. These individuals might be better at fighting infections or detecting cancer cells. But this genetic gift can become a curse when that same precision turns inward. An immune system that's exceptionally good at recognizing foreign invaders might also be more likely to mistake subtle changes in its own tissues as signs of danger. Scientists have found that people with certain HLA variants are much more likely to develop specific autoimmune conditions. For example, having the HLA-B27 variant increases your risk of developing ankylosing spondylitis, a condition where the immune system attacks the spine by more than 100-fold. It's like carrying a genetic predisposition for your immune system to develop a very specific type of confusion. But here's what makes this story even more intriguing. Having these high-risk genetic variants doesn't guarantee that autoimmune disease will develop. The vast majority of people who carry them remain perfectly healthy throughout their lives. The genes load the gun, as researchers sometimes say, but something else has to pull the trigger. This is where environmental triggers enter our detective story, those external factors that can transform genetic predisposition into active disease. Think of them as the match that lights a fire that's been carefully prepared with genetic kindling. These triggers come in many forms. Infections are among the most common and well-studied. Sometimes, bacteria or viruses carry proteins that look suspiciously similar to proteins in your own tissues. When your immune system learns to attack the infectious organism, it might also learn to attack those similar-looking self-proteins, a phenomenon scientists call molecular mimicry. It's like training guards to recognize dangerous intruders by showing them photographs, only to discover later that some of the guards can't tell the difference between the photos of criminals and photos of the homeowner's family members. The training was perfect, the recognition was precise, but the targets were too similar to distinguish reliably. One of the most dramatic examples of this involves rheumatic fever, which can develop after certain strep throat infections. The streptococcal bacteria carry proteins that resemble proteins in heart muscle. After successfully clearing the infection, some people's immune systems continue to attack what they perceive as lingering streptococcal proteins. Except these lingering proteins are actually part of the person's own heart. Physical and emotional stress can also serve as triggers, though through mechanisms that are still being unraveled. Chronic stress affects hormone levels, sleep patterns, and immune function in complex ways. It's as if prolonged stress makes the immune system more irritable, more likely to overreact to minor provocations, more prone to making the kinds of recognition errors that lead to autoimmune attack. Chemical exposures, dietary factors, smoking, even changes in the microbial communities that live in your gut. All of these have been implicated as potential triggers for autoimmune diseases in genetically susceptible individuals. The research suggests that our modern environment, so different from the ancestral conditions in which our immune systems evolved, might be creating new opportunities for these ancient recognition systems to go awry. But perhaps the most mysterious aspect of autoimmune triggers is their unpredictability. Two people with identical genetic risk factors might be exposed to the same environmental trigger, yet only one develops autoimmune disease. It's like having two identical houses, each equipped with identical smoke detectors, exposed to identical amounts of smoke, yet only one alarm goes off. This suggests that there are factors we don't yet understand, variables in the equation that remain hidden from our current detective methods. Perhaps it's a matter of timing, the age at which exposure occurs, or the presence of other infections that might modulate the immune response. Perhaps it's related to the specific microbial communities living in each person's body, or subtle differences in stress levels, or environmental exposures we haven't yet learned to measure. Some researchers theorize that it might even involve epigenetic factors, changes in how genes are expressed, rather than changes in the genes themselves. These modifications can be influenced by environmental factors and might help explain why autoimmune diseases sometimes seem to skip generations, appearing in grandchildren of affected individuals even when the parents remain healthy. Perhaps you're wondering, as you listen to this story unfold, whether this could happen to anyone. Could your own immune system, right now so perfectly balanced and beautifully coordinated, someday lose its way and begin to attack the very body it has spent your entire life protecting? The honest answer is both reassuring and sobering. While we all carry some genetic variants that might predispose us to autoimmune confusion, and while we're all exposed to potential environmental triggers throughout our lives, the vast majority of people never develop autoimmune diseases. The perfect storm of factors required to trigger these conditions is actually quite rare. But the possibility exists for all of us, written into the very sophistication of our immune systems. The same exquisite sensitivity that makes our immune defenses so effective also makes them potentially vulnerable to the kinds of recognition errors that lead to autoimmune attack. It's like living in a house protected by an incredibly sophisticated security system, one so advanced that it can detect threats that haven't even been invented yet, so sensitive that it can spot a single infected cell among billions of healthy ones. This system protects you beautifully, day after day, year after year. But its very sophistication means that if something goes wrong with its programming, the consequences can be profound. The mystery of autoimmunity continues to unfold as researchers develop new tools for molecular detection, new ways of understanding genetic risk, new insights into environmental triggers. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, bringing us closer to understanding not just how these conditions develop, but perhaps more importantly, how they might be prevented or reversed. But our detective story is far from over. As we continue our exploration together, we'll discover the many faces this autoimmune confusion can wear, the different ways it can manifest in different people, and the remarkable resilience that humans show in the face of having their own defenses turned against them. For now, though, let this knowledge settle gently into your consciousness like snow falling on a quiet landscape. The story of autoimmunity is ultimately a story about the complexity and beauty of biological systems. Systems so sophisticated that their very perfection contains within it the seeds of their own potential confusion. And perhaps there's something profoundly human about this paradox. After all, aren't we all occasionally confused about who we are, who belongs in our lives, and what deserves our protection? The difference is that when our immune cells experience this confusion, the consequences play out in the intimate theatre of our own bodies, written in the language of inflammation and healing, of attack and repair, of illness, and the endless, quiet hope for restoration. As you rest there in your comfortable space, I invite you to imagine walking through a gallery unlike any other, not one filled with paintings or sculptures, but with stories. Stories written in the language of cells and chemistry, each one telling a different tale of how the human immune system can lose its way. These are not stories of defeat, but of the remarkable diversity of ways that our biological systems can express confusion and the equally remarkable resilience with which humans adapt to these cellular rebellions. Each condition we'll explore together is like a different movement in a complex symphony, variations on the theme of autoimmunity, each with its own rhythm, its own progression, its own particular beauty and tragedy. They remind us that the human body is not a simple machine with straightforward failures, but rather an intricate ecosystem where the same fundamental process, immune cells attacking self, can manifest in dozens of profoundly different ways. Let's begin our gallery walk with a story about your thyroid, that small butterfly-shaped gland that sits at the base of your neck like a gentle guardian of your body's energy systems. Most people never think about their thyroid until something goes wrong, yet this modest organ orchestrates some of the most fundamental processes of life. Your heart rate, your body temperature, your metabolism, even the speed at which your thoughts flow. The thyroid produces hormones that act like molecular messengers, traveling through your bloodstream to virtually every cell in your body, carrying instructions about how fast to work, how much energy to consume, how quickly to grow and repair. It's like having a master conductor whose baton movements determine the tempo of your entire biological orchestra. In Hashimoto's thyroiditis, named after the Japanese physician Hikaru Hashimoto, who first described it in 1912, your immune system develops a peculiar obsession with this innocent gland. T cells and B cells begin to infiltrate thyroid tissue, setting up permanent encampments like occupying armies. They produce antibodies with names that sound almost poetic: antithyroglobulin, antithyroid peroxidase, each one precisely engineered to attack specific proteins that are essential for thyroid function. What's particularly fascinating about this condition is how slowly and subtly it progresses. Unlike the dramatic onset of some autoimmune diseases, Hashimoto's often unfolds over years or even decades. Your thyroid, under constant immune attack, gradually loses its ability to produce hormones. The gland may actually enlarge as it tries to compensate, forming what doctors call a goiter, the thyroid's desperate attempt to maintain function despite the cellular siege taking place within its tissues. The symptoms reflect this gradual energy drain. Fatigue that sleep doesn't cure, a metabolism that slows like a clock winding down, skin that becomes dry, and hair that grows thin, a mind that feels wrapped in cotton, and a cold that seems to seep into your bones even on warm days. It's as if your body's thermostat has been gradually turned down, degree by degree, until everything runs just a little too slowly, a little too quietly. Yet there's something almost gentle about how people adapt to this condition. The changes are usually so gradual that many individuals adjust their expectations, their daily rhythms, their very sense of normal, without even realizing that their energy is being slowly drained by this microscopic civil war in their neck. Now let me take you on a journey through your digestive tract, that remarkable 20-foot tunnel that transforms the food you eat into the energy and building blocks your body needs to survive. Most of this journey occurs in your small intestine, an organ that's actually not small at all when you consider its internal surface area. If you could unfold it completely, your small intestine would cover the area of a tennis court, its walls lined with millions of tiny finger-like projections called villi that wave gently in the digestive currents like underwater plants in a peaceful stream. This is normally one of the most tolerant places in your body. Your intestinal immune system has learned to coexist peacefully with the thousands of species of bacteria that call your gut home, to ignore the constant parade of food proteins passing through, and to maintain a delicate balance between protection and tolerance. It's like a diplomatic zone where multiple species live in harmony, each playing their role in the complex ecosystem of digestion. But in Crohn's disease, this peaceful valley becomes a battlefield. Named after Dr. Bases, Burrell Crohn, who described it in 1932, this condition transforms the normally tolerant intestinal immune system into something aggressive and destructive. Immune cells begin to treat normal gut bacteria, long-time residents, who have lived peacefully in your intestines for years, as dangerous invaders. The inflammation that results is not gentle or superficial. It burrows deep into the intestinal wall, creating a full-thickness assault that can affect every layer of tissue from the inner lining to the outer muscular coat. The affected areas become thick and inflamed, like rivers that have flooded their banks, disrupting the normal flow of digestion and absorption. What makes Crohn's particularly mysterious is its pattern of involvement. Unlike other inflammatory bowel conditions that affect continuous stretches of intestine, Crohn's creates what pathologists call skip lesions, areas of severe inflammation separated by patches of completely normal tissue. It's as if the immune system has developed a very specific map of where to attack, leaving some areas untouched while devastating others just inches away. The symptoms reflect this internal storm: cramping pain that can be severe enough to double you over, diarrhea that disrupts daily life, and sometimes bleeding as the inflamed tissues become fragile and raw. But perhaps more profound are the systemic effects: the fatigue that comes from poor nutrient absorption, the weight loss as the body struggles to extract nourishment from food, and the unpredictable nature of flare-ups that can turn a normal day into a medical emergency. Your skin is your body's largest organ, a living barrier that separates your inner world from the outer environment, while somehow managing to be both tough enough to protect you and sensitive enough to help you navigate the world through touch. Under normal circumstances, skin cells are born deep in the epidermis and take about a month to mature as they slowly migrate toward the surface, eventually sloughing off so gently that you rarely notice the process. But in psoriasis, this orderly progression becomes a frantic race. Skin cells begin to divide and mature at a rate that's almost 10 times faster than normal, as if they're trying to escape from something deep within the tissue. The result is the formation of thick, scaly patches, plaques that can appear anywhere on the body but seem to favor the knees, elbows, scalp, and lower back. These plaques tell a story of immune confusion written in the language of inflammation. T cells that should ignore normal skin begin to perceive skin cells as threats, releasing chemical signals that trigger rapid cell division and recruit more immune cells to the area. The affected skin becomes a crowded neighborhood where too many cells are trying to exist in too small a space, creating the characteristic thick, silver-scaled appearance that gives psoriasis its name from the Greek word psora, meaning itch. But psoriasis is more than skin deep. Many people with this condition also develop psoriatic arthritis, where the same immune confusion that affects the skin begins to target joints as well. It's as if the immune system, having learned to attack one part of the body, sometimes expands its targeting to include related tissues. The connection between skin and joints might seem unlikely, but both tissues share certain proteins that can become the focus of autoimmune attack. What's particularly poignant about psoriasis is how visible it can be. Unlike many autoimmune conditions that remain hidden within the body, psoriasis often displays itself on areas of skin that are difficult to conceal. This visibility can add a layer of emotional complexity to the physical symptoms, as individuals navigate not just the medical aspects of their condition but also the social responses it can provoke. And now we come to perhaps the most enigmatic character in our gallery: systemic lupus erythematosus, or simply lupus. If other autoimmune conditions are like focused attacks on specific targets, lupus is like a confusion that spreads throughout the entire body, a condition so variable in its presentation that doctors sometimes call it the great imitator, because it can mimic almost any other disease. The name itself tells a story of mystery and misunderstanding. Lupus is Latin for wolf, chosen by medieval physicians who thought the facial rash that sometimes accompanies this condition resembled the markings around a wolf's eyes. Erythematosus refers to the redness of inflammation. But these names, poetic as they are, barely capture the complexity of a condition that can affect virtually any organ system in the body. In lupus, your immune system seems to lose its ability to distinguish between foreign threats and your own tissues on a global scale. It produces antibodies against your own DNA, the very molecular blueprint that defines you as you. It attacks cell nuclei, those sacred chambers where your genetic information is stored. It forms immune complexes that can deposit in small blood vessels throughout your body, causing inflammation in kidneys, brain, heart, lungs, and joints. The clinical presentation of lupus is as varied as the people who develop it. Some individuals experience primarily joint pain and fatigue, symptoms so common that they might be attributed to stress or aging. Others develop serious kidney involvement that threatens life itself. Some have skin rashes, hair loss, or sensitivity to sunlight. Others experience neurological symptoms, seizures, psychosis, or cognitive changes that can be mistaken for psychiatric disorders. This variability makes lupus one of the most challenging autoimmune conditions to diagnose. There's no single test that can definitively identify it, no characteristic pattern that appears in every patient. Instead, doctors rely on constellation of findings, a combination of symptoms, laboratory abnormalities, and physical signs that together paint a picture of systemic autoimmune activity. The unpredictability of lupus extends to its course over time. Some people experience periods of active disease, followed by long remissions where symptoms almost disappear. Others have persistent, low-level activity that waxes and wanes like ocean tides. Still others face aggressive disease that requires intensive treatment from the moment of diagnosis. As we pause in our gallery walk, I want you to notice something beautiful and profound about these conditions we've explored together. Despite their very different presentations, the slow thyroid failure of Hashimoto's, the intestinal storms of Crohn's, the racing skin cells of psoriasis, the systemic chaos of lupus, they're all fundamentally variations on the same cellular theme. In each case, the story begins with immune cells that have somehow learned to perceive normal body tissues as foreign threats. In each case, the resulting inflammation follows predictable patterns, recruiting the same types of cells, using the same molecular weapons, following the same basic script of immune activation. Yet the specific tissues targeted, the pace of the attack, the severity of the damage, and the body's ability to repair itself all vary tremendously from person to person and condition to condition. It's like listening to different musicians play variations on the same musical theme. The underlying melody remains recognizable, that fundamental motif of immune confusion and autoimmune attack, but each interpretation brings its own tempo, its own emotional coloring, its own unique beauty and complexity. This interconnectedness becomes even more apparent when you consider that many people don't develop just one autoimmune condition. Having one form of autoimmune disease increases your risk of developing others, as if the immune system, having learned to attack self in one context, becomes more prone to making similar mistakes elsewhere. Some individuals develop what doctors call overlap syndromes, conditions that don't fit neatly into any single diagnostic category, but instead show features of multiple autoimmune diseases simultaneously. Others progress from one condition to another over time, their immune confusion expanding to encompass new targets as the years pass. This interconnectedness hints at something deeper about the nature of autoimmunity itself, something that becomes clearer when we step back from individual conditions and consider the broader spectrum of immune confusion that affects our species. As you settle more deeply into your comfortable space, I want to share with you a perspective that has revolutionized how scientists think about autoimmune diseases. Rather than viewing them as distinct, separate conditions like different books sitting on a shelf, researchers have begun to see them as points along a continuous spectrum, like colors blending into one another across a rainbow. This spectrum thinking helps explain some of the puzzling observations that have emerged from decades of autoimmune research. Why certain conditions tend to occur together in the same families, why some people develop features of multiple autoimmune diseases simultaneously, and why treatments that work for one condition sometimes help with others that seem completely unrelated. Imagine, if you will, a vast landscape of immune possibilities. At one end lies perfect immune tolerance, a state where your immune system recognizes and peacefully coexists with every component of your body, never making mistakes, never attacking self. At the other end lies complete autoimmune chaos, a theoretical state where the immune system attacks everything indiscriminately, unable to distinguish between self and non-self at all. Most of us live somewhere in the middle of this spectrum, in a region where our immune systems maintain generally good tolerance but occasionally make small mistakes, producing a few antibodies against our own tissues, creating minor inflammatory responses to normally harmless substances, or showing subtle signs of immune confusion that never progress to clinical disease. These subclinical autoimmune phenomena are far more common than most people realize. Studies have found that healthy individuals often carry low levels of autoantibodies, those molecular fingerprints of immune confusion we discussed earlier. They might have slightly elevated markers of inflammation, or immune cells that show subtle signs of activation without any apparent cause. This background level of immune confusion is like the static on an old radio, always present, but usually too quiet to interfere with the music. For most people, it remains just that, background noise that never rises to the level of causing symptoms or requiring treatment. But for some individuals, this quiet confusion gradually amplifies. The immune static grows louder, the autoimmune signals become stronger, and eventually they cross some invisible threshold where molecular confusion becomes clinical disease. The fascinating thing is that this threshold seems to be different for different people, influenced by genetics, environment, age, stress, and factors we don't yet fully understand. One of the most important concepts for understanding this spectrum is molecular mimicry, a phenomenon that sounds like something from a spy novel, but is actually one of the most elegant explanations for how autoimmune diseases develop. Picture your immune system as having an enormous library of wanted posters, molecular descriptions of all the foreign threats it has learned to recognize over your lifetime. Each poster describes a specific shape, a particular protein structure, or a characteristic chemical signature that identifies dangerous bacteria, viruses, or other invaders. Now imagine that some of these foreign criminals happen to look remarkably similar to innocent citizens' your own body's proteins. When your immune system learns to recognize and attack the foreign threat, it might also learn to attack your own tissues that share similar molecular features. This isn't a flaw in the system, it's an inevitable consequence of the finite number of molecular shapes that exist in the biological world. With millions of different proteins in bacteria, viruses, and human cells, some overlap is statistically inevitable. It's like living in a city so large that some criminals are bound to look like law-abiding citizens. The classic example involves rheumatic fever, which we touched on earlier. Group A, streptococcal bacteria, carry a protein called M protein, which has regions that closely resemble proteins found in human heart muscle. When your immune system mounts a response against strep throat, some of the antibodies and T cells it produces can cross-react with heart tissue, leading to the heart inflammation characteristic of rheumatic fever. But molecular mimicry extends far beyond this single example. Researchers have identified potential molecular mimics for many autoimmune conditions. Viral proteins that resemble myelin in multiple sclerosis, bacterial proteins that look like joint tissues in rheumatoid arthritis, and microbial components that might trigger the attack on insulin-producing cells in type 1 diabetes. What makes this particularly intriguing is that the same infectious trigger might lead to different autoimmune outcomes in different people, depending on their genetic background and other factors. It's as if the same case of mistaken identity could lead to attacks on different innocent bystanders, depending on which tissues happen to be most vulnerable in each individual. One of the most striking features of the autoimmune spectrum is how predictably these conditions cluster according to age and gender. Like flowers that bloom in different seasons, autoimmune diseases tend to appear at characteristic times of life, following patterns that provide clues about their underlying mechanisms. Many autoimmune conditions show a strong preference for women, particularly during the reproductive years. Lupus affects women 9 times more often than men. Hashimoto's thyroiditis, Sjogren's syndrome, and rheumatoid arthritis all show similar female predominance. This gender bias is so consistent that it has led researchers to investigate the role of hormones, particularly estrogen, in autoimmune development. Estrogen appears to enhance immune responses in complex ways. It can make immune cells more sensitive to threats, more likely to produce antibodies, and more prone to inflammatory reactions. During pregnancy, when estrogen levels are highest, many autoimmune conditions actually improve, as if the hormonal changes somehow restore balance to the confused immune system. But after delivery, as hormone levels drop precipitously, autoimmune diseases often flare, sometimes more severely than before. The timing of autoimmune onset also provides insights into disease mechanisms. Type 1 diabetes typically begins in childhood or adolescence, striking during periods of rapid growth and development when the immune system is still learning and adapting. Multiple sclerosis most commonly appears in young adulthood, during the peak years of myelin formation and nervous system maturation. Some conditions seem to prefer the middle years of life. Rheumatoid arthritis often begins in the 40s and 50s, as if requiring decades of exposure to environmental triggers before the perfect storm of factors comes together. Others, like giant cell arteritis, rarely appear before age 50, suggesting that some aspects of immune aging might actually contribute to their development. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of the autoimmune spectrum is how these conditions cluster in families, passed down not as certainties but as whispered possibilities, genetic predispositions that may or may not find expression across the generations. Walk into any autoimmune clinic, and you'll hear stories that sound like variations on a familiar theme. My grandmother had rheumatoid arthritis, my mother has lupus, and now I've been diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. These family narratives reveal that what's inherited isn't any specific disease, but rather a general tendency toward immune confusion, a genetic susceptibility that can manifest in different ways in different family members. The HLA genes we discussed earlier play a central role in this inherited susceptibility. These genes, which determine the shape of your cellular identification tags, come in hundreds of different variants. Some combinations seem to create immune systems that are particularly prone to confusion, particularly sensitive to molecular similarities, particularly likely to develop autoimmune responses. But the inheritance patterns are complex and mysterious. Identical twins, who share exactly the same DNA, show concordance rates for autoimmune diseases that range from about 25 to 50%, meaning that if one twin develops an autoimmune condition, the other has roughly a 1 in 3 to 1 in 2 chance of developing it as well. This suggests that genetics provides the foundation, but environment and chance play crucial roles in determining who actually develops disease. Even more intriguingly, different autoimmune conditions can run in the same families, as if the inherited susceptibility is to autoimmunity in general rather than to any specific disease. A family might include members with type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and thyroid disease, all different manifestations of the same underlying tendency toward immune confusion. Some researchers have begun to think of autoimmune diseases as sharing what they call autoimmune diathesis, a constitutional tendency toward immune system malfunction that can express itself in various ways, depending on environmental triggers, hormonal influences, age, stress, and pure chance. This family clustering also reveals something profound about the evolutionary history of our immune systems. The genetic variants that predispose to autoimmune diseases haven't been eliminated by natural selection, despite their potential to cause serious illness. This suggests that these same genetic variants might provide advantages under certain circumstances, perhaps better resistance to infections, enhanced ability to detect and eliminate cancer cells, or other benefits that outweigh their autoimmune risks. It's a reminder that biological systems rarely involve simple trade-offs between good and bad. Instead, they reflect complex balancing acts, where the same genetic features that make us vulnerable in some contexts might make us resilient in others. The autoimmune spectrum also shows us something beautiful about human adaptability. Despite the challenges these conditions present, people find ways to live full, meaningful lives within the constraints of chronic illness. They develop new rhythms, new priorities, new appreciations for the simple moments when their bodies feel at peace. Families affected by autoimmune diseases often develop deeper bonds, greater empathy, and more sophisticated understanding of health and illness. Children who grow up watching parents manage chronic conditions sometimes become more compassionate adults, more aware of the invisible struggles that others might be facing. As we conclude our walk through this gallery of autoimmune conditions, I hope you're struck not just by the complexity of these diseases, but by the remarkable resilience of the people who live with them. Each condition we've explored represents not just a medical diagnosis, but a human story of adaptation, acceptance, and the quiet courage required to build a meaningful life alongside chronic illness. The spectrum of autoimmunity reminds us that the line between health and disease is often less clear than we might imagine. We all exist somewhere along this continuum, our immune systems maintaining an imperfect but usually adequate balance between protection and tolerance, vigilance and peace. And perhaps there's something comforting in recognizing that even our most sophisticated biological systems are not perfect, that even our most elegant evolutionary achievements contain within them the seeds of their own confusion. It makes our struggles, whether with autoimmune disease or with any of life's other challenges, seem less like personal failures and more like variations on the universal theme of being beautifully, imperfectly human. The morning light filters through the bedroom curtains, and you wake to assess the day ahead not by checking the weather or your calendar, but by taking inventory of your body. How do the joints feel? Is there stiffness in the hands? A familiar ache in the lower back? Or that particular heaviness behind the eyes that signals inflammation has been busy overnight? This daily assessment becomes as routine as brushing teeth for those living with autoimmune conditions, a quiet negotiation between hope and reality that begins before feet touch the floor. Living with an overactive immune system means inhabiting a body at war with itself, where the very mechanisms designed to protect have become the source of daily challenge. It's a peculiar form of betrayal to be undermined not by an external enemy, but by the most intimate systems of self-defense. The immune system, in its misguided vigilance, has turned its sophisticated weaponry inward, treating healthy tissue as foreign invaders that must be eliminated. This internal conflict manifests in ways both profound and mundane. The person with rheumatoid arthritis learns to open jars with their whole body, using hips and elbows when fingers refuse to cooperate. The individual with multiple sclerosis discovers that heat, once a simple pleasure of summer days or hot baths, now becomes an adversary that amplifies symptoms. Those with inflammatory bowel disease map their world around the location of bathrooms, a geography of necessity that others never consider. Perhaps no symptom of autoimmune disease is more misunderstood than fatigue. This is not the tiredness that follows a long day of work, or the sleepiness that comes after staying up too late. This is fatigue that arrives like fog, dense and encompassing, making even simple tasks feel as though they're being performed underwater. It's the bone-deep exhaustion that rest doesn't cure, sleep doesn't heal, and caffeine cannot penetrate. To understand autoimmune fatigue, imagine your body as a city with limited resources. In health, these resources, energy, nutrients, cellular repair mechanisms, are distributed efficiently. Some to maintain basic functions, some to respond to daily stresses, and reserves kept available for unexpected demands. But in autoimmune disease, it's as if a significant portion of the city's emergency services, construction crews, and power grid have been indefinitely reassigned to fight a war that exists only in the imagination of the command center. The immune system, convinced of imminent threat, mobilizes massive resources for battle. Inflammatory cytokines flood the system like sirens wailing through empty streets. White blood cells march to positions where no enemy waits. The cellular machinery of inflammation runs continuously, burning through energy stores and creating the biochemical byproducts of conflict. Meanwhile, the ordinary business of living, repairing daily wear and tear, maintaining muscle strength, supporting cognitive function, is relegated to whatever resources remain. This redistribution of the body's resources creates a fatigue that is both physical and cognitive. Muscles lack the energy for normal function, leading to weakness that seems disproportionate to activity. The brain, deprived of its usual energy allocation, struggles with focus, memory, and processing speed. What others accomplish effortlessly becomes a careful calculation of energy expenditure, a constant weighing of what's essential against what's available. The invisibility of this fatigue adds another layer of challenge. From the outside, the person appears unchanged. There's no cast to indicate injury, no obvious sign of illness. Well-meaning friends and family offer suggestions. Have you tried getting more sleep? Maybe you need more exercise? Perhaps it's just stress? Each suggestion, however kindly meant, carries the implicit message that this fatigue is somehow within the person's control, a failure of willpower rather than a consequence of biological reality. Inflammation, in its proper role, is one of the body's most elegant healing mechanisms. When tissue is injured, the inflammatory response rushes to the scene like skilled emergency responders. Blood vessels dilate to allow increased flow of nutrients and immune cells to the affected area. The region becomes warm, red, and swollen, visible signs that healing is underway. Pain and stiffness encourage rest and protection of the injured area. This acute inflammation is brief, purposeful, and ultimately restorative. But in autoimmune disease, inflammation becomes chronic and misdirected, like a fire department that never stops responding to false alarms. The inflammatory response remains perpetually activated, flooding healthy tissues with the chemicals of healing when no healing is needed. The heat of inflammation, which should be temporary and localized, becomes a constant presence throughout the body. This chronic inflammation manifests differently depending on which tissues the immune system has mistakenly targeted. In the joints, it creates the heat, swelling, and pain of arthritis, morning stiffness that requires time and gentle movement to ease, joints that feel hot to the touch, and the peculiar sensation of one's own body feeling foreign and uncooperative. In the digestive system, inflammation transforms the simple act of eating into a complex negotiation, as foods that once brought pleasure now trigger pain, cramping, and urgent need. When inflammation affects the nervous system, it creates symptoms that can seem almost mystical in their strangeness. The person with multiple sclerosis might experience electric shock sensations traveling down their spine when they bend their neck forward, or find that one side of their face has become numb overnight. These neurological symptoms often confuse even experienced healthcare providers, as they don't follow the predictable patterns of injury or infection. The systemic nature of autoimmune inflammation means that it affects not just the primary target tissues, but the entire body. Sleep becomes disrupted as inflammatory chemicals interfere with normal sleep cycles. Mood changes as the brain responds to chronic inflammation with alterations in neurotransmitter production. Even temperature regulation becomes affected, leading to the peculiar experience of feeling simultaneously hot and cold, or having hands and feet that seem to belong to someone else entirely. Perhaps one of the most isolating aspects of living with autoimmune disease is the invisible nature of many symptoms. Unlike a broken bone or a surgical scar, the daily realities of autoimmune conditions often remain hidden from the outside world. This invisibility creates a complex social dynamic where the person's experience of illness is questioned, minimized, or simply not believed. The woman with lupus looks healthy in the grocery store, but what others can't see is the crushing fatigue that makes each step deliberate, the joint pain that makes reaching for items on high shelves, an exercise in careful planning, or the brain fog that makes remembering her shopping list feel like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. The young man with Crohn's disease appears vibrant and energetic at work, while privately managing pain, dietary restrictions, and the constant awareness of where the nearest bathroom is located. This invisibility extends beyond physical symptoms to include the cognitive and emotional impacts of autoimmune disease. Brain fog, the clouding of mental clarity that many experience, is particularly difficult for others to understand. It's not simply forgetfulness or distraction, but a profound change in cognitive function that can make formerly simple tasks feel overwhelming. Reading a book might become difficult, not because of vision problems, but because the brain struggles to maintain focus and comprehension. Conversations that once flowed easily now require conscious effort to follow and participate in. The invisible nature of symptoms also affects relationships with healthcare providers. When symptoms fluctuate, when laboratory tests don't always correlate with symptom severity, when the person looks too young or too healthy to have a serious condition, the medical encounter can become an exercise in advocacy and explanation rather than treatment and support. Pain in autoimmune disease often defies the usual logic of discomfort. In typical injury, pain serves as a clear communication system. Touch a hot stove and pain immediately signals withdrawal. Overuse a muscle and soreness indicates the need for rest. But autoimmune pain speaks in a more confusing dialect, sending messages that seem to have lost their translation. Joint pain might flare without any apparent trigger, arriving like an unwelcome visitor who provides no explanation for their presence. The pain might migrate from one joint to another, following no anatomical logic in the fingers at breakfast, the knees by lunch, the shoulders by evening. This wandering quality can make it difficult even for the person experiencing it to describe accurately, leading to medical encounters where symptoms sound vague or inconsistent. The quality of autoimmune pain is often unlike other forms of discomfort. It might feel like burning without heat, like pressure without anything pressing, like electricity without shock. People search for metaphors to explain sensations that seem to exist outside normal experience. It feels like my bones are made of glass, or like someone is squeezing my muscles from the inside, or as if my nerves are playing the wrong song. Muscle pain in autoimmune conditions can be particularly puzzling. Unlike the satisfying ache that follows a good workout, pain that carries the message of strength, building, and effort rewarded autoimmune muscle pain often feels punitive and purposeless. Muscles might ache after minimal exertion, or feel tender to even light touch. The normal relationship between activity and discomfort becomes unreliable, making it difficult to gauge appropriate levels of exercise or activity. Perhaps most challenging is neuropathic pain, the result of inflammation affecting nerve tissue itself. This pain can manifest as burning, tingling, numbness, or shocking sensations that seem to have no relationship to external stimuli. A light touch might feel like sandpaper against the skin, or areas of the body might feel completely disconnected from sensation. These symptoms can be particularly distressing because they challenge our basic understanding of how our bodies should feel and respond. The unpredictability of autoimmune pain adds another layer of complexity. Unlike the reliable ache of arthritis that worsens with weather changes, or the predictable soreness that follows overexertion, autoimmune pain often seems to follow its own mysterious schedule. This unpredictability makes planning difficult and can create anxiety about when symptoms might next appear or intensify. The unpredictable nature of autoimmune symptoms creates a unique form of chronic stress, the stress of uncertainty. Each day brings the question of how the body will feel and function. Will this be a day when symptoms are manageable, allowing for normal activities and social engagement? Or will it be a day when pain, fatigue, or other symptoms require significant modification of plans and expectations? This uncertainty affects not just daily planning, but long-term goals and dreams. Career decisions must account for the possibility of symptom flares that might interfere with work responsibilities. Social commitments become tentative, qualified with the unspoken understanding that plans might need to change based on how the body feels. Travel requires careful consideration of symptom management, medication schedules, and access to healthcare in unfamiliar places. The uncertainty extends to the disease process itself. Unlike conditions with predictable progressions, many autoimmune diseases follow erratic courses. Periods of relative stability might be followed by sudden flares of activity. New symptoms might appear without warning, requiring adjustment to both treatment plans and daily routines. This unpredictability can make it difficult to feel secure in any sense of normalcy or routine. Yet within this uncertainty, many people develop a remarkable adaptability. They learn to read their body's subtle signals, becoming expert interpreters of symptoms that might puzzle even experienced physicians. They develop backup plans for backup plans, creating flexible approaches to work, relationships, and personal goals that can accommodate the changing demands of their condition. For those listening who may recognize these experiences in their own lives, know that this recognition itself is significant. The daily reality of autoimmune disease can feel isolating, as if you're living in a world that others can't see or understand. But you are not alone in this experience. Millions of people navigate these same challenges, developing their own strategies for living well within the constraints and unpredictabilities of autoimmune conditions. The experience of autoimmune disease is deeply personal, yet universally human in its themes of adaptation, resilience, and the search for understanding. In recognizing these realities, we begin to create space for more honest conversations about illness, more compassionate responses to invisible disability, and more effective approaches to care that honor the full complexity of living with an immune system that has lost its way. Living with autoimmune disease is not merely a physical experience, it's an emotional journey that touches every aspect of human feeling and psychological adaptation. The emotional landscape of chronic illness is as complex and varied as the physical symptoms themselves, encompassing grief and joy, frustration and acceptance, isolation and connection, despair and hope, often within the span of a single day. Understanding this emotional terrain is crucial not just for those who navigate it personally, but for family members, friends, healthcare providers, and anyone seeking to comprehend the full human impact of autoimmune conditions. These emotional responses are not secondary to the physical experience, they are interwoven with it, each influencing the other in ways that science is only beginning to understand. Perhaps no aspect of living with autoimmune disease is more emotionally challenging than the unpredictability of symptoms. Humans are creatures of habit and planning, finding comfort in routine and security in being able to anticipate what lies ahead. Autoimmune disease disrupts this fundamental human need for predictability, creating a state of chronic uncertainty that can be profoundly unsettling. The psychological impact begins each morning with the daily assessment ritual, that moment of wakeful evaluation where the mind quickly catalogues how the body feels. Is today a good day or a difficult day? Can previously made plans be kept, or will they need to be modified or cancelled? This constant need to assess and adjust can create a hypervigilant state, where part of the mind is always monitoring for changes in symptoms, energy levels, or pain. This unpredictability affects not just immediate plans, but the ability to envision and work toward future goals. Career aspirations might need to be reconsidered in light of uncertain energy levels and health status. Social commitments become tentative, qualified with the unspoken caveat, if I'm feeling well enough. Even simple pleasures like planning a weekend activity or accepting a dinner invitation can become sources of anxiety rather than anticipation. The ripple effects extend into relationships as well. Family members and friends may struggle to understand why someone can seem energetic and capable one day, then exhausted and limited the next. The person with autoimmune disease might face skepticism about their symptoms, suggestions that they're exaggerating or being dramatic, or well-meaning but misguided advice about pushing through or not giving in to their condition. This unpredictability can also create internal conflict and self-doubt. On difficult days, it's natural to wonder if symptoms are truly as severe as they feel, or if more effort could overcome limitations. On better days, there might be guilt about not doing more, not pushing harder, not taking advantage of feeling relatively well. This internal dialogue can become exhausting in its own right, adding psychological burden to physical symptoms. The loss of spontaneity that comes with unpredictable symptoms represents a particular kind of grief. The ability to act on impulse, to say yes to unexpected opportunities, to live without constant consideration of physical limitations, these losses might seem small to others, but they represent fundamental changes in how life is experienced and lived. Yet many people living with autoimmune conditions develop remarkable psychological adaptations to this uncertainty. They learn to hold plans lightly, to find joy and flexibility rather than frustration in change. They develop what might be called adaptive planning, creating multiple versions of activities based on different symptom scenarios. A planned hiking trip might have backup options of a gentle walk or simply sitting in nature, all equally valued for the connection and experience they provide. One of the most profound and often unrecognized aspects of living with autoimmune disease is the grief that accompanies the loss of the familiar body. This grief is complex because it's not grief for something that's gone completely, but for something that's fundamentally changed the body that once felt predictable, reliable, and truly one's own. This grief often begins with the diagnosis itself, but it doesn't end there. It continues to evolve as the reality of living with chronic illness unfolds. There's grief for the physical capabilities that have changed or been lost. The ability to exercise without carefully calculated consequences, to eat certain foods without paying a price, to have energy that feels bottomless rather than carefully rationed. But the grief goes deeper than physical limitations. There's mourning for the innocence of assuming the body will cooperate with the mind's intentions. Before chronic illness, most people give little conscious thought to their body's functioning hearts. Beat, lungs breathe, joints move, and energy flows without conscious management or worry. Autoimmune disease brings a hyper-awareness of bodily functions that were once unconscious, turning the body from a trusted partner into something that requires constant attention and negotiation. This grief is complicated by the intermittent nature of many autoimmune symptoms. Unlike grief for a clear loss, autoimmune grief is punctuated by reminders of what once was. A good day might bring back glimpses of the former self, making the limitations feel fresh and acute when symptoms return. This creates a cycle of hope and disappointment that can be emotionally exhausting. The grief extends to identity as well. Many people define themselves, at least in part, by their physical capabilities or roles that may be affected by chronic illness. The marathon runner who must redefine their relationship with exercise, the chef who can no longer tolerate many foods, the parent who has less energy for active play with children. These changes require not just practical adaptation, but psychological reconciliation of who they are now with who they once were. Society's emphasis on productivity and physical achievement can intensify this grief. Messages about overcoming illness or not letting it define you, while well-intentioned, can inadvertently minimize the very real losses that chronic illness brings. The grief for these losses is legitimate and necessary. It's not self-pity or weakness, but a natural response to genuine change and loss. This grief process doesn't follow a linear progression. Like all grief, it comes in waves, sometimes triggered by specific events or memories, sometimes arising without apparent cause. A photograph from before symptoms began. watching others engage in activities that are no longer possible, or simply having a particularly difficult symptom day can bring waves of mourning for what has changed. While the losses associated with autoimmune disease are real and deserving of acknowledgement, they represent only part of the emotional landscape. Alongside grief and challenge, many people discover strengths they didn't know they possessed and develop capacities for adaptation that surprise even themselves. This strength often emerges gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. It might begin with small adaptations, learning to pace activities differently, finding new ways to accomplish tasks, or developing sensitivity to the body's signals. Over time, these small adaptations accumulate into a broader capacity for flexibility and resilience. Many people discover that living with chronic illness has taught them to appreciate experiences more fully. When energy is limited, activities that are chosen become more intentional and valued. A simple walk in the park, a conversation with a friend, or a moment of feeling physically comfortable might carry more meaning than previously experienced. This isn't to romanticize illness or suggest that suffering is valuable in itself, but to recognize that constraint can sometimes lead to deeper appreciation. The process of learning to live with autoimmune disease often develops what psychologists call adaptive coping, the ability to adjust goals and expectations in response to changing circumstances while maintaining a sense of purpose and well-being. This might involve redefining success in terms of consistency rather than intensity, valuing rest as much as activity, or finding meaning in adaptation itself. Many people report developing greater empathy and compassion, both for themselves and others, through their experience with chronic illness. Understanding intimately what it means to struggle with invisible challenges creates sensitivity to others' unseen difficulties. This empathy often extends beyond illness to encompass understanding of all forms of human struggle and limitation. The development of self-advocacy skills represents another form of strength that often emerges from living with autoimmune disease. Learning to communicate effectively with healthcare providers, to articulate symptoms and needs clearly, to research treatment options, and to make informed decisions about care, these skills often generalize into greater assertiveness and self-advocacy in other areas of life. Acceptance, when it comes, is not passive resignation but an active choice to work with reality rather than against it. This acceptance doesn't mean liking the situation or giving up hope for improvement, but rather developing the ability to find contentment and purpose within current circumstances while remaining open to positive change. One of the most powerful antidotes to the isolation that can accompany autoimmune disease is connection with others who share similar experiences. This connection can take many forms: formal support groups, online communities, casual friendships with others who understand, or even brief encounters with fellow patients in medical waiting rooms. There's something profoundly healing about being truly understood. When someone nods knowingly at the description of fatigue that feels like moving through molasses, or laughs in recognition at the frustration of explaining invisible symptoms to skeptical friends, it creates a sense of validation that can be deeply therapeutic. This understanding doesn't require explanation or justification, it simply exists, offering relief from the constant need to translate one's experience for others. These connections often provide practical benefits as well as emotional support. Others with similar conditions can offer advice about symptom management, recommendations for healthcare providers, tips for adapting daily activities, or suggestions for products that might help. This practical knowledge, shared from lived experience, often complements and enhances medical care. The online world has created unprecedented opportunities for connection among people with autoimmune conditions. Forums, social media groups, and video calls can connect individuals across geographic boundaries, allowing people with rare conditions to find others with similar experiences, or enabling those in areas with limited resources to access support and information. However, these connections also require careful navigation. Online communities can sometimes become focused on comparing symptoms or competing over who has the most severe experience. The most helpful connections tend to be those that balance acknowledgement of difficulties with focus on adaptation and hope. Many people find that their experience with autoimmune disease ultimately expands their community rather than limiting it. Healthcare providers who show genuine understanding and compassion often become valued members of one's support network. Family members and friends who make the effort to learn and understand may develop deeper relationships than existed before illness. New friendships formed around shared experience of chronic illness can be particularly meaningful and supportive. The act of helping others with similar conditions can also be healing for the helper. Many people find meaning and purpose in sharing their experience, whether through formal peer support roles, informal mentoring, or simply being available to answer questions from newly diagnosed individuals. This giving back can transform the experience of illness from purely personal suffering into something that serves a broader purpose. In the landscape of chronic illness, knowledge serves as more than just information. It becomes a form of companionship, a steady presence that provides comfort and direction even in uncertain times. Understanding one's condition, its mechanisms, and its patterns can transform the experience from one of bewildering confusion to one of informed navigation. This knowledge begins with understanding the basic science of autoimmune disease, learning why symptoms occur, what triggers flares, how treatments work, and what to expect over time. This educational process can feel overwhelming at first, as the vocabulary of medicine is complex, and the information can seem vast and sometimes contradictory. But gradually, as understanding builds, many people report feeling more empowered and less frightened by their condition. Knowledge provides a framework for making sense of symptoms that might otherwise feel random or overwhelming. Understanding that fatigue is a result of immune system activation rather than laziness, that pain patterns reflect inflammation rather than weakness, that cognitive symptoms are neurobiological rather than psychological, this knowledge can be profoundly validating and relieving. The process of learning about one's condition often develops research and critical thinking skills that serve well beyond health management. Many people become expert at evaluating medical literature, understanding study limitations, and making informed decisions about treatment options. These skills often generalize into greater confidence in other areas of decision-making and problem-solving. Knowledge also enables more effective communication with healthcare providers. Understanding medical terminology, knowing what questions to ask, and being able to describe symptoms accurately all contribute to more productive medical encounters and better healthcare outcomes. Perhaps most importantly, knowledge provides hope. Understanding that research is ongoing, that new treatments are being developed, that symptoms can be managed, and quality of life improved, this knowledge offers something to hold on to during difficult times. It transforms the experience from one of passive suffering to one of active participation in one's own care and recovery. This hope is not naive optimism that ignores the realities of chronic illness, but rather hope grounded in understanding. It's hope that acknowledges current limitations while remaining open to future possibilities. It's hope that finds meaning in adaptation and growth, even within the constraints of chronic illness. The journey of living with autoimmune disease is ultimately one of profound human adaptation. It encompasses the full range of human emotion and experience grief and joy, fear and courage, isolation and connection, despair and hope. Understanding this emotional landscape is crucial for anyone touched by autoimmune disease, whether personally or through caring for others. For those who recognize their own experience in these descriptions, know that your emotional responses are valid and normal. The grief is real, the adaptation is remarkable, and the hope is justified. You are not alone in this journey, and your experience, while uniquely your own, is shared by millions of others who understand intimately what it means to live in a body at war with itself, yet continue to find ways to thrive, connect, and hope. In recognizing and honoring the full emotional reality of autoimmune disease, we create space for more compassionate care, more understanding relationships, and more effective support for all those whose lives are touched by these complex conditions. The emotional landscape of chronic illness is as important as the physical terrain, and both deserve our attention, understanding, and care. In the complex theater of autoimmune disease, modern medicine has evolved from the crude instruments of early intervention to sophisticated tools of negotiation and balance. Where once treatments were blunt and broadly suppressive, today's approaches represent a nuanced understanding of immune function diplomatic negotiations with rebellious cells rather than wholesale warfare against the body's own defenses. This evolution in treatment philosophy reflects a deeper appreciation for the delicate ecosystem of immunity. Rather than viewing the immune system as simply overactive and in need of suppression, contemporary medicine recognizes that autoimmune conditions represent a loss of communication a breakdown in the cellular conversations that normally maintain peace within the body. The goal is not to silence these conversations entirely, but to restore their proper tone and content. Understanding modern autoimmune treatments requires abandoning the metaphor of warfare that has long dominated medical thinking. Instead, imagine the immune system as a complex society where different cellular populations must coexist and communicate effectively. In autoimmune disease, certain groups within this society have become radicalized, convinced that peaceful neighbors are actually dangerous enemies requiring elimination. Traditional approaches to this problem were akin to declaring martial law, broadly suppressing all immune activity to prevent the rebellious cells from causing damage. While sometimes necessary, this approach left the entire body vulnerable to infections and other threats that a functioning immune system would normally handle with ease. Modern therapeutic approaches are more like skilled diplomatic interventions. Rather than shutting down all communication, these treatments work to restore proper dialogue between different immune cell populations. Some therapies act as translators, helping cells interpret signals correctly. Others serve as mediators, blocking the inflammatory messages that perpetuate conflict. Still others work like peacekeepers, removing the most aggressive cells while leaving the peaceful majority intact. This diplomatic approach requires careful timing and precision. Just as international diplomacy must account for cultural nuances and historical grievances, immune-targeted therapies must consider the specific ways different autoimmune conditions develop and progress. The treatment that works well for rheumatoid arthritis, where the conflict centers primarily in joint tissues, may be ineffective for multiple sclerosis, where the battlefield is the nervous system. The art of modern autoimmune treatment lies in finding the minimal intervention that achieves maximum benefit. This principle, known in medicine as treating to target, involves using the least amount of immune suppression necessary to control disease activity while preserving as much normal immune function as possible. It's a delicate calibration that requires ongoing monitoring and adjustment, much like tuning a complex musical instrument to achieve perfect harmony. To understand immunosuppression in autoimmune disease, imagine the immune system as a vast choir where every voice has an important part to sing. In health, this choir performs in perfect harmony, T cells providing the melody, B cells adding rich harmonies, cytokines keeping the rhythm, and regulatory cells conducting the entire performance. But in autoimmune disease, certain sections of the choir have begun singing too loudly, drowning out the subtle harmonies and creating a cacophonous din that overwhelms the intended song. Early immunosuppressive treatments were like turning down the master volume on the entire performance. Medications such as corticosteroids and broad-spectrum immunosuppressants, like methotrexate, reduce the overall activity of the immune system, effectively quieting all the voices in the choir. While this approach can certainly reduce the overwhelming noise of autoimmune inflammation, it also mutes the important voices, those that fight infections, survey for cancer cells, and maintain tissue health. Corticosteroids, among the oldest and most widely used immunosuppressive medications, work by broadly dampening inflammatory responses throughout the body. These medications mimic cortisol, the body's own stress hormone, which naturally suppresses immune activity during times of physical stress. While remarkably effective at controlling acute autoimmune flares, long-term use of corticosteroids can lead to significant side effects including bone thinning, increased infection risk, metabolic changes, and mood alterations. The challenge with broad immunosuppression is achieving the delicate balance between controlling autoimmune activity and maintaining enough immune function to protect against genuine threats. This balance point varies not only between different individuals but also within the same person over time. Factors such as stress, infections, seasonal changes, and life events can all shift this balance, requiring careful monitoring and dose adjustments. Methotrexate, originally developed as a cancer chemotherapy agent, has found new life as a cornerstone of autoimmune treatment. At the much lower doses used for autoimmune conditions, methotrexate doesn't destroy rapidly dividing cells as it does in cancer treatment, but rather modulates immune cell communication and reduces inflammatory cytokine production. It's like having a conductor who gently signals to the loudest sections of the choir to moderate their volume while allowing the overall performance to continue. The newer generation of immunosuppressive agents includes medications like mycophenolate mofetil and azathioprine, which work by interfering with specific pathways of immune cell activation and proliferation. These medications offer more targeted suppression than older agents, reducing some of the broad side effects while maintaining effectiveness in controlling autoimmune activity. One of the most significant advances in immunosuppressive therapy has been the recognition that these medications work best when used in combination, often at lower doses than would be required if used individually. This approach, known as combination therapy, allows for more precise control of immune activity while minimizing the side effects associated with higher doses of individual medications. The development of targeted therapies represents perhaps the most significant advance in autoimmune treatment in the past several decades. These medications, often called biologics because they're derived from living cells, work like precision tools for cellular diplomacy targeting specific molecules or pathways involved in autoimmune inflammation, while leaving the rest of the immune system largely intact. To understand how targeted therapies work, it's helpful to think of autoimmune inflammation as a complex conversation involving multiple participants. Imagine inflammatory cells as people at a heated political rally, where inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, and interleukin-17 are the inflammatory speeches that whip the crowd into a frenzy. Traditional immunosuppressive treatments might be like turning off the sound system entirely, preventing any communication. Targeted therapies, by contrast, are like removing only the most provocative speakers while allowing normal, constructive conversation to continue. TNF-alpha inhibitors, among the first successful targeted therapies, work by neutralizing tumor necrosis factor alpha, a key inflammatory cytokine involved in many autoimmune conditions. Medications like adalimumab, etanercept, and infliximab act like molecular sponges, soaking up excess TNF-alpha before it can trigger inflammatory cascades. For many people with rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, or inflammatory bowel disease, these medications have been transformative, allowing them to regain function and quality of life that seemed permanently lost. Interleukin inhibitors represent another class of targeted therapy, each designed to block specific inflammatory signals. IL-6 inhibitors like tocilizumab target the cytokine that drives much of the systemic inflammation and fatigue associated with conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and giant cell arteritis. IL-17 inhibitors such as secukinumab are particularly effective for psoriasis and ankylosing spondylitis, conditions where this specific inflammatory pathway plays a central role. B-cell targeting therapies, such as rituximab, work by temporarily depleting B cells, the immune cells responsible for producing antibodies. This approach can be particularly effective in conditions where autoantibodies play a central role, such as rheumatoid arthritis or certain forms of vasculitis. The beauty of this approach is that B cells eventually regenerate, often without the same autoimmune programming that caused problems initially. JAK inhibitors represent a newer class of targeted therapy that works by blocking Janus kinases, enzymes that transmit inflammatory signals within cells. Medications like tofacitinib and baricitinib can be taken orally, unlike many other targeted therapies that require injection, making them more convenient for long-term use. These medications block multiple inflammatory pathways simultaneously, providing broad anti-inflammatory effects while still being more targeted than traditional immunosuppressants. The development of targeted therapies has also revealed important insights about the heterogeneity of autoimmune diseases. What were once considered single conditions are now understood to encompass multiple subtypes, each with distinct molecular signatures. This understanding has led to more personalized treatment approaches, where therapy selection is based not just on the diagnosis, but on the specific inflammatory pathways active in each individual case. One of the greatest challenges in autoimmune treatment is achieving the optimal balance between suppressing harmful autoimmune activity and preserving the immune system's essential protective functions. This balance is not static, it shifts based on individual factors, disease activity, environmental exposures, and life circumstances, requiring constant vigilance and adjustment. Understanding this balance requires appreciating that the immune system serves multiple critical functions beyond just fighting infections. It surveils for cancer cells, maintains tissue homeostasis, promotes wound healing, and even influences mood and cognitive function through its interactions with the nervous system. When treatments suppress immune function, they affect all these processes to some degree. The risk of infection is the most obvious concern with immune suppression. But the reality is more nuanced than simply more suppression equals more infections. Different immunosuppressive medications affect different aspects of immune function, leading to distinct infection risk profiles. For example, medications that primarily affect T cells may increase the risk of viral infections and certain fungi, while those that affect neutrophils may predispose to bacterial infections. Monitoring for this balance involves not just watching for obvious signs of infection, but also tracking more subtle indicators of immune function. Regular blood tests monitor white blood cell counts, liver function, and other markers that might indicate medication effects. Patients learn to recognize early signs of infection and to seek medical attention promptly when concerning symptoms develop. The concept of treating to target has become central to modern autoimmune care. Rather than using fixed doses of medications regardless of disease activity, this approach involves adjusting treatment intensity based on objective measures of inflammation and disease activity. The goal is to use the minimum amount of immune suppression necessary to achieve and maintain disease remission. Vaccination strategies become particularly important in immunosuppressed patients. Live vaccines, which contain weakened but living pathogens, are generally avoided in people taking immunosuppressive medications because of the risk that the vaccine organism might cause infection. However, inactivated vaccines, while potentially less effective in immunosuppressed individuals, remain important tools for preventing serious infections. The timing of immunosuppressive therapy initiation also requires careful consideration of this balance. In some autoimmune conditions, early aggressive treatment can prevent irreversible damage, making the temporary increase in infection risk worthwhile. In others, a more gradual approach may be safer, particularly in older individuals or those with other health conditions that increase infection risk. While pharmaceutical interventions often capture the most attention in autoimmune treatment, lifestyle factors represent equally important and often underappreciated tools for managing these conditions. These interventions work not through dramatic suppression of immune function, but through gentle, consistent influences that help restore balance to the immune system over time. The concept of lifestyle as medicine recognizes that the daily choices we make about food, movement, sleep, stress management, and social connection all send signals to our immune systems. Unlike medications that work through specific molecular targets, lifestyle interventions influence immune function through multiple pathways simultaneously, often with effects that complement and enhance pharmaceutical treatments. Nutrition represents one of the most powerful lifestyle interventions for autoimmune conditions, though the relationship between diet and immune function is complex and highly individual. Anti-inflammatory dietary patterns, such as the Mediterranean diet, provide consistent intake of nutrients that support immune regulation while minimizing foods that may promote inflammation. Omega-3 fatty acids, found in fatty fish, walnuts, and flax seeds, serve as building blocks for specialized pro-resolving mediators, molecules that help resolve inflammation and restore tissue homeostasis. These nutrients don't suppress inflammation as much as they support the body's natural processes for ending inflammatory responses and promoting healing. Fiber-rich foods support the gut microbiome, the community of bacteria and other microorganisms that live in our digestive tract and play crucial roles in immune function. These beneficial bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids and other metabolites that help regulate immune responses, supporting tolerance to harmless substances while maintaining the ability to respond to genuine threats. Some individuals with autoimmune conditions find that certain foods trigger symptom flares, leading to the adoption of elimination diets or other restrictive eating patterns. While food sensitivities are real and can be important for some people, overly restrictive diets can sometimes do more harm than good, leading to nutritional deficiencies or social isolation around food. The goal is finding the least restrictive diet that supports optimal health and symptom management. Physical activity represents another powerful lifestyle intervention, though the relationship between exercise and autoimmune disease is nuanced. Moderate, regular exercise has anti-inflammatory effects and supports immune regulation, while excessive exercise can actually promote inflammation and suppress immune function. For people with autoimmune conditions, finding the sweet spot of beneficial exercise often requires careful attention to how different types and intensities of activity affect symptoms. Low-impact activities like walking, swimming, tai chi, and yoga are often well tolerated and beneficial for people with autoimmune conditions. These activities provide cardiovascular benefits, support joint health, and can help manage stress without placing excessive demands on the body. Strength training, when appropriate, helps maintain muscle mass and bone density, both of which can be affected by chronic inflammation and certain medications. Sleep quality emerges as a crucial factor in immune regulation, with poor sleep consistently associated with increased inflammation and autoimmune disease activity. During deep sleep, the body produces growth hormone and other factors that support tissue repair and immune system maintenance. Sleep deprivation, by contrast, increases inflammatory cytokines and disrupts the normal circadian rhythms that help regulate immune function. For people with autoimmune conditions, achieving restorative sleep often requires attention to sleep hygiene, the practices and environmental factors that promote good sleep. This might include maintaining consistent sleep and wake times, creating a dark and cool sleep environment, limiting caffeine and screen time before bed, and addressing any underlying sleep disorders such as sleep apnea. Stress management represents perhaps the most complex lifestyle intervention, as stress affects immune function through multiple pathways involving the nervous system, endocrine system, and direct effects on immune cells. Chronic stress consistently promotes inflammation and can trigger autoimmune flares, while effective stress management techniques can have measurable anti-inflammatory effects. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, meditation, deep breathing exercises, and other contemplative practices have been shown to reduce inflammatory markers and improve quality of life in people with autoimmune conditions. These practices work not by eliminating stress, which is neither possible nor desirable, but by changing how the body responds to stressful situations. Social connection and community support also function as lifestyle medicine, with strong social relationships associated with better immune function and reduced inflammation. The isolation that can accompany chronic illness may inadvertently worsen autoimmune symptoms, while maintaining meaningful relationships and social engagement can provide significant health benefits. The integration of lifestyle interventions with conventional medical treatment requires ongoing communication with healthcare providers. Some lifestyle changes, particularly dietary modifications or exercise programs, may affect how medications work or influence disease monitoring. The goal is creating a comprehensive approach that leverages both pharmaceutical and lifestyle interventions for optimal health outcomes. For many people with autoimmune conditions, lifestyle modifications provide a sense of empowerment and active participation in their care. While they may not have chosen to have an autoimmune condition, they can choose how to respond to it through daily decisions about food, movement, sleep, and stress management. These choices, while they may seem small individually, accumulate over time to create meaningful differences in health and quality of life. The effectiveness of lifestyle interventions often unfolds gradually, over weeks to months rather than the more immediate effects often seen with medications. This timeline can be both challenging and rewarding. Challenging because it requires patience and consistency, rewarding because the benefits, when they come, often feel sustainable and empowering. Understanding lifestyle as medicine also helps explain why autoimmune treatment is so highly individualized. While medications target specific molecular pathways that are relatively consistent between people, lifestyle interventions interact with individual genetic backgrounds, personal preferences, cultural factors, and life circumstances. What works beautifully for one person may be ineffective or even counterproductive for another, requiring personalized approaches to diet, exercise, stress management, and other lifestyle factors. Standing at the frontier of autoimmune research and treatment, we find ourselves in an era of unprecedented possibility. The horizon stretches before us, illuminated by emerging therapies and revolutionary approaches that were unimaginable just decades ago. This is not false optimism or unfounded hope, but realistic anticipation based on solid scientific foundations that are already beginning to transform how we understand and treat autoimmune conditions. The landscape of possibility includes approaches that don't just manage symptoms or slow disease progression, but actually address the root causes of autoimmune dysfunction. These emerging therapies work toward the ultimate goal, teaching the immune system to remember how to distinguish friend from foe, how to maintain the delicate balance between protection and tolerance that defines optimal immune function. At the heart of autoimmune disease lies a fundamental breakdown in immune tolerance, the normally exquisite ability of the immune system to recognize and spare the body's own tissues. Understanding how tolerance develops, how it's maintained, and how it can be restored represents one of the most promising avenues of current autoimmune research. Immune tolerance is not a single mechanism, but rather a complex network of cellular interactions and molecular signals that work together to prevent autoimmune responses. Central tolerance occurs during immune cell development, where developing T and B cells that react too strongly to self-antigens are eliminated or reprogrammed. Peripheral tolerance involves multiple mechanisms that prevent or control autoimmune responses in mature immune cells circulating throughout the body. Regulatory T cells, often called tregs, serve as perhaps the most important guardians of immune tolerance. These specialized cells actively suppress inflammatory responses and maintain peace between the immune system and the body's own tissues. In many autoimmune conditions, treg function is impaired. Either there are too few of these regulatory cells or they're not functioning effectively. Current research is exploring multiple approaches to restore or enhance treg function. Some experimental therapies involve expanding a patient's own tregs outside the body, then reinfusing them to restore immune balance. Others work by stimulating the body's natural production of regulatory cells or enhancing their function through targeted interventions. Low-dose interleukin-2 therapy represents one promising approach currently in clinical trials. IL-2 is a cytokine that's essential for treg survival and function, and carefully calibrated low doses can selectively enhance regulatory cell activity without broadly stimulating inflammatory responses. Early studies in conditions like systemic lupus, erythematosus, and type 1 diabetes have shown promising results. Antigen-specific tolerance induction represents perhaps the most elegant approach to treating autoimmune disease. Rather than broadly suppressing the immune system, this approach aims to specifically re-educate immune cells about particular self-antigens, teaching them to tolerate rather than attack specific tissues. This approach involves identifying the specific proteins or peptides that are targeted in each autoimmune condition, then presenting them to the immune system in ways that promote tolerance rather than inflammation. Various methods are being explored, including oral tolerance induction, where antigens are given by mouth to promote tolerance through the gut immune system, and intravenous tolerance induction, where modified antigens are injected in ways that promote regulatory rather than inflammatory responses. Peptide-based tolerance induction has shown particular promise in multiple sclerosis, where researchers have identified specific myelin proteins that are targeted by autoimmune responses. By administering modified versions of these peptides, clinical trials are exploring whether the immune system can be retrained to tolerate rather than attack myelin. The concept of molecular mimicry, where immune responses originally directed against infectious agents cross-react with self-antigens, has opened new avenues for tolerance induction. If autoimmune responses begin as appropriate responses to infections that then mistakenly target similar-looking self-antigens, it may be possible to specifically tolerize these cross-reactive responses while preserving protective immunity. Tolerogenic dendritic cells represent another promising approach. Dendritic cells are the immune system's primary antigen-presenting cells, responsible for teaching other immune cells what to recognize and how to respond. Researchers are developing ways to create dendritic cells that specifically promote tolerance rather than inflammation, potentially serving as cellular vaccines against autoimmune responses. Beyond controlling inflammation and preventing further damage, regenerative medicine approaches aim to actually restore tissues and functions that have been lost to autoimmune attack. This field represents a fundamental shift from damage control to actual healing and restoration. Stem cell therapies represent the most widely recognized approach to regenerative medicine in autoimmune conditions. These treatments work on multiple levels, not just by potentially replacing damaged cells, but also by modulating immune responses and promoting tissue repair through the secretion of growth factors and other healing molecules. Mesenchymal stem cells derived from bone marrow, fat tissue, or other sources have shown particular promise in autoimmune conditions. These cells have natural immunomodulatory properties, meaning they can help calm overactive immune responses while simultaneously promoting tissue repair. Clinical trials have explored their use in conditions ranging from multiple sclerosis to Crohn's disease, with encouraging results in many studies. Hematopoietic stem cell transplantation represents a more intensive approach that essentially resets the immune system. This procedure involves harvesting stem cells from the patient's bone marrow, then using chemotherapy or radiation to eliminate the existing immune system before reinfusing the stem cells to generate a new immune system. While intensive and carrying significant risks, this approach has shown remarkable results in severe autoimmune conditions that haven't responded to other treatments. The concept behind immune system reset is elegant. If autoimmune disease results from immune cells that have learned inappropriate responses, eliminating these cells and allowing new immune cells to develop in a different environment might restore normal immune function. Studies have shown that patients who undergo this procedure often achieve long-term remission of their autoimmune conditions. Tissue engineering approaches are being developed for conditions where autoimmune attack has destroyed specific organs or tissues. For type 1 diabetes, researchers are working to create bioengineered pancreatic islets that could restore insulin production. These approaches often combine stem cell-derived cells with biomaterial scaffolds and protective encapsulation systems that prevent immune attack while allowing proper function. Gene therapy represents another frontier in regenerative approaches to autoimmune disease. Rather than replacing damaged cells, gene therapy aims to modify existing cells to restore normal function or enhance natural repair processes. This might involve introducing genes that promote tissue repair, enhance regulatory immune cell function, or provide missing factors needed for normal tissue maintenance. CRISPR and other gene editing technologies are opening new possibilities for precisely correcting genetic factors that contribute to autoimmune susceptibility. While most autoimmune diseases involve multiple genetic factors, rather than single gene defects, targeted gene editing might still provide therapeutic benefits by modifying key regulatory pathways. Organoid technology, the ability to grow miniature organ-like structures from stem cells, is revolutionizing how researchers study autoimmune diseases and test potential treatments. These three-dimensional tissue models allow scientists to observe how autoimmune processes affect specific organs and to test regenerative therapies in systems that closely mimic human tissues. Perhaps no area of autoimmune research has generated more excitement in recent years than the study of the microbiome, the vast community of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other microorganisms that live in and on our bodies. This internal ecosystem, once dismissed as largely irrelevant to health, is now recognized as a crucial player in immune system development and function. The relationship between the microbiome and immune function begins before birth and continues throughout life. During infancy, exposure to maternal microbes during birth and early feeding patterns help establish the gut microbiome and simultaneously educate the developing immune system about what constitutes normal versus threatening organisms. This early education appears to be crucial for preventing autoimmune diseases later in life. Children born by cesarean section who miss exposure to maternal, vaginal, and gut microbes have increased rates of certain autoimmune conditions. Similarly, early antibiotic exposure, which can disrupt the developing microbiome, is associated with increased autoimmune disease risk. The human microbiome plays a crucial role in regulating the immune system. Beneficial bacteria produce metabolites like short-chain fatty acids that influence immune cell behavior, promoting regulatory T cells and reducing inflammation. These microbes also crowd out harmful organisms, providing a natural defense known as colonization resistance. When the microbiome becomes imbalanced, a condition called dysbiosis, it's frequently linked to autoimmune disorders such as inflammatory bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, and rheumatoid arthritis. These imbalances often feature reduced microbial diversity and a shift away from beneficial species. This connection has inspired a wave of microbiome-based therapies. Probiotics, though widely available, show mixed results depending on the specific strains and diseases treated. Fecal microbiota transplantation, FMT, has proven remarkably effective against recurrent Clostridioides difficile infections and is being studied for broader autoimmune applications. Emerging treatments aim for personalization. Rather than giving everyone the same probiotics, scientists are analyzing individual microbiomes to design custom bacterial or nutritional therapies. Microbiome-derived therapeutics go further, isolating beneficial molecules from healthy microbiomes and developing them into targeted drugs. The gut-brain connection is another promising avenue. Psychobiotics bacteria that influence mood and behavior are particularly relevant for autoimmune patients who often experience anxiety and depression. Certain strains may affect neurotransmitters and stress hormones, offering mental health and immune benefits. Diet is a powerful modulator of the microbiome. Beyond general advice to eat more fiber, research is pinpointing specific prebiotic compounds and fermented foods that enhance microbial diversity and health. These dietary strategies offer a simple but powerful tool for improving immune regulation. Personalized medicine is shaping the future of autoimmune treatment. Genetic testing is already influencing medication choices, allowing doctors to predict who will benefit from drugs like methotrexate or biologics based on genetic variants. Pharmacogenomics is also helping tailor therapies that target specific immune molecules. Biomarker-guided therapies use detailed immune profiles, including cytokine levels and gene expression patterns, to match patients with the most effective treatments. Cytokine profiling, for example, can determine whether TNF inhibitors or IL-6 blockers are more likely to work. Even more powerful are multi-omics approaches, which combine data from genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and more. Machine learning can analyze these complex datasets to identify patterns and predict treatment outcomes. Digital health tools like symptom tracking apps and wearable monitors enable dynamic, real-time treatment adjustments. Artificial intelligence is increasingly involved in this revolution. AI can detect subtle changes in imaging and uncover hidden patterns in massive datasets, helping clinicians refine diagnoses, monitor disease progression, and personalize treatment plans. Lifestyle prescriptions are also being tailored. Instead of broad recommendations, future approaches may offer specific dietary or exercise plans based on genetic and metabolic profiles. Precision lifestyle interventions could optimize results while minimizing side effects. One of the most ambitious goals in autoimmune research is immune system reset, restoring balance rather than just managing symptoms. Hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, HSCT, is the most advanced of these approaches, effectively rebooting the immune system in severe cases. Newer strategies aim to reset without such intensity. Selective depletion of autoreactive immune cells, thymic regeneration to restore healthy T-cell education, and epigenetic reprogramming to shift immune cell behavior all represent promising frontiers. CAR T-cell therapy, originally developed for cancer, is being adapted to target autoimmune B cells. Checkpoint inhibitors used in cancer to boost immunity could potentially be reversed to enhance immune tolerance in autoimmunity. The concept of trained immunity also offers promise. By teaching innate immune cells to react in less inflammatory ways, researchers hope to promote long-lasting tolerance. The ultimate vision is to combine these approaches into multi-step reset strategies, remove harmful immune cells, restore microbiome balance, regenerate tissue, and retrain the immune system for peace rather than war. Though some therapies like HSCT are available now, many remain experimental. But the momentum is strong. Preventive strategies could eventually protect high-risk individuals before autoimmune symptoms even appear. For those living with autoimmune conditions today, this research pipeline offers both hope and action. Participating in clinical trials, where appropriate, not only provides access to cutting-edge care, but also contributes to a future where autoimmune disease is no longer chronic and incurable. Our journey through autoimmunity has revealed a complex but deeply connected system. The immune system, so powerful, so intelligent, sometimes turns against the body. Yet within this paradox lies a deeper truth. The same complexity that allows for dysfunction also enables healing. We've learned that immune health isn't just about cells or genes in isolation, it's a symphony of microbiota, behavior, diet, and environment. Understanding this intricate web reminds us that the human body is more than a sum of its parts. It is a dynamic, adaptive ecosystem with incredible capacity for recovery. As we look toward a future of personalized, precise, and even curative treatments, we're reminded that science is not just a pursuit of knowledge, but of restoration of balance, harmony, and hope. The immune system's ancient promise of protection, even when faltering, continues to whisper of the body's potential to heal. We've traveled far from the silent battles waged in our tissues to the mysterious conversations between cells. Autoimmunity, once an enigma, now reveals itself as a paradox. How the very system designed to protect us can sometimes lose its sense of self. And yet, within this betrayal lies a deeper truth, the resilience of the human body and the quiet strength of the human spirit. Our journey through this complex landscape has shown how deeply interconnected all biological systems are. Nothing functions in isolation. The gut speaks to the brain, the skin whispers to the immune system, and memory is etched not just in neurons, but in immune cells too. Amid the chaos, there is meaning. Within confusion, there is coherence, if only we learn to listen. Tonight, we close with gratitude for the complexity and beauty we've uncovered. Rest now. Let your body, that remarkable organism, breathe and repair. Stay curious, your inner universe still has secrets to share. And remember, in learning how our guardians sometimes rebel, we glimpse both our fragility and our remarkable capacity for healing. As you drift towards sleep, know that within you flows an ancient river of immunity. Imperfect, yes, but still miraculous.